Très bonne présentation, very good presentation on the market. I have two things to say about the presentation. Is first, in 1981, my dad forced me to save $300 in the Canada saving bonds, and it was 18.5%. So when we look at these things, it's amazing that today, in a world when you can have a mortgage for 30 years, you can't afford 4%. It tells you how much people are consuming. It's crazy. The other thing I will remember probably forever is I have 4 children. If they all stay until they're 30, I need to build an attic over the garage. So, okay. So I think it fits well to do this presentation after the first one because the Softwood Lumber Board is all about growing the pie. So how can we use more wood? And throughout the presentation, I tried to put a lot of pictures because wood's nice, it's natural. I think we forgot about that over the years. And it's something that we really need to think about. When you're building a home, you're building a commercial building, you're usually building it for 100 years. So it's worth spending the time to see what kind of components we can use. So I've added a lot of pictures, some from Canada, some from the US. And I think you'll see for yourself that if we're smart about it and we want to use wood, I mean, there's endless possibilities. Okay, so where is all that coming from? How many of you do export in the US from Canada? So you probably know that if you're a sawmill or an exporter, if you export more than 15 million board feet, you're paying 35 cents a thousand board feet to help promote wood. What is that program? It's called a checkoff. Anybody has heard about the checkoff? It's been going on for over 7 years now, and it's been renewed in 2018. Basically, a checkoff is to put producers together to promote the product. So when the checkoff started in Canada and the US, it's right after the 2006 lumber agreement where some of the money was put aside to try to promote wood. If you remember, there was $5 billion in the bank account when the agreement was settled. $1 billion stayed in the US, $4 billion came back to Canadian producers. And really part of it was to create a momentum to try to use more wood. So again, growing the pie. I hope I'm going to convince you is that it does make a difference. And if we talk about wood, the examples are going to speak by themselves. Checkoff programs and programs like that, it's not only for wood. When I accepted to do this presentation, I took the time to go onto the US websites to see what other programs are doing the same thing. Well, paper is doing the same thing to try to tell people it's not true that, you know, printing a piece of paper is not good for the environment. It depends how it's done and so on. Almonds are doing it. Beef is doing it. And the funniest one I found was Christmas trees. Did you know that Christmas tree producers have a checkoff program? And I think they give like 15 cents per tree just to promote the use of a natural Christmas tree versus a Christmas tree that's made in China and shipped to Canada. So it's not the only program. It does work. And I'll try to share with you some of the good things that were done and what the objectives are going forward. So it's basically split into 4 different main areas. The first one, and those are all associations that the Softwood Lumber Board, with the 35 cents, is giving money. How much money are we talking about? By getting those 35 cents, we're talking about $14 million a year. So the split between the 4 different segments is about $14 million. About a third goes to American Wood Council, a third to Woodwork, a third to Think Wood, and there's 10% for really research about how to use wood. American Wood Council, what is it? It's really about building codes. How do we make it easy for builders to use wood? So the big achievement there is in the 2021 building code, you're now allowed to build up to 18 stories with wood. This was impossible before. The code wouldn't allow it. So starting in 2021, and some states have already started to do some of that, you can build 9 stories with fully exposed wood. Above 9 stories, you need to put some sheetrocks or some protection, and this is all about fire. So, you know, if it's high, then the code asks you to protect wood so that the fire code is respected as well. But you'll see through the presentation, most of the potential is below 8 stories anyway. So the big achievement for growing the pie for wood was really to get to that 8, 9 stories so that builders can use more wood easier. So you can use light frame, you can use mass timber, glulam, beams, NLT, CLT. I mean, these are all products that if you go back 10 years ago, there were very few of them, and there's more and more available in the market now. Now, if you look in Canada, Canada has a pretty good track record. For the people that watched the Olympics in 2010, I mean, if you ever go to Vancouver and you haven't seen it, you need to go see the long track speed skating. I mean, it's just, it's a masterpiece. It was made out of wood, fully exposed. Think wood. Think wood is the second component that also gets about 30%, so it's about $4 million a year. It's to talk about wood. You know, sometimes we think that, you know, we don't need to do anything. It's going to happen. If you talk about stuff, I mean, people, and more than ever today, with social media, people are on the internet, they're only reading the headlines. You need to expose wood. You need to talk about wood. This is the mandate of Think Wood. So it's in universities, architects, newspapers, social media. You need to make sure that people that are in the decision-making have wood in mind. And again, when people think about big structure, it's not only glulam and CLT, it's also light frame. Third one is Woodworks. Woodworks does direct assistance. So if you need an advice, you have a project, you'd like to do it with wood, you don't know how to proceed, you call Woodworks and they'll give you free advice, they'll tell you where to go, and they'll even help you to design. They'll try to find contractors that have been trained and know how to build with wood. And this brings like multifamily projects, commercial projects, so anything that's not a single family home, bigger structure. If you go back in time, I mean, most of those projects are done with concrete and steel. So in the next slides, I'll show you examples, and then I'll show you some of the reaction from the concrete industry and the steel industry. And above and beyond graphs and trends, and there's more use of wood, I think that when you look at your competitors, what they're saying about what we're doing with wood, it gives you the answer. If you're not bothering anybody with what you're doing, it's probably not working. When people start attacking you, and I mean, and it's happening, there's a lot of negative press about wood. Wood burns, you know, wood kills trees and stuff like that. It tells you that the objective is met, is to use more wood. And wood is sustainable. So I'm not a big fan of graph. The softwood lumber board, because we want to make sure that what we're doing has an impact. We contracted third parties to see what is the impact of more non-residential, more 5 stories, more 6-story building on the consumption of wood. Because the main objective is to grow the pie. Well, we're now more than 1 billion board feet more in consumption every year with wood, and those market share, they're taken away from the non-wood industry, mostly concrete and steel. Competitors. So the concrete guys are saying that, you know, we're doing aggressive and it is going to take some market share. So they're reacting to that. They did launch a negative campaign on wood, and I'll show you some pictures. Of course, we're going to disturb the market, but when you think about it, the potential for more wood is over 8 billion board feet a year if we just take some share of the other industries. Future of wood. So that's going to be a series of pictures. I'll tell you a bit, you know, where they're from and how they were done. So you have this. This is Portland, Oregon. This is a non-residential business. I believe this one is an architect office. So he designed it, he built it, and it was built with NLT, which is nail laminated timber. So it's basically kind of a CLT, but it's nailed by some wooden nails. Very nice. And the product was made in British Columbia, a company called Structurlam. Some of the component is also CLT. So you see, it's a different design of building. It will pass time easily, where it's not something that will be in fashion for a few years, and it's a very solid structure. This one is Mountain Equipment Co-op. Anybody in Quebec and Canada, I guess, know. Mountain Equipment Co-op is the equivalent of, I think it's REI in the US, like kind of the outdoor store. That's their head office in Vancouver, and it was built with NLT as well. So companies that have a good mindset about being sustainable and care for the environment, they look at wood, because wood is really a natural product, and it's, it's basically storing carbon dioxide. So the story about wood has to be told. And examples, I mean, a building like this for me that likes wood, it's kind of, it can be in a magazine versus a regular, rectangular building. This one is very interesting. It's not built yet. It's in the project mode. As you guys know, Canadians are big hockey fans. Seattle got a team. Quebec did not. But sorry. I'm not a Quebec fan, so that's okay. You can't be both up here. You got to be either Montreal or Quebec. But they're going to build their training center with CLT and glulam. So when they were awarded the team, they went to, I believe it was Stinkwood, and told them, we want to do it with wood. The West Coast is very good about building with wood, I think more than on the East Side. I mean, especially in the US. And they said, we like what we saw. They saw what happened in the Olympics. They says, we really want something that's nice. So it's now decided they're going to build it with wood. So projects like that, I mean, this is not like the arena that's going to hold 22,000 people, but this is going to get a lot of exposure. And projects that have exposure, I mean, it's a snowball effect. I mean, people like it, they want to do the same, and it just builds momentum. This one is, I can't read here, Atlanta, Georgia. This is light frame, so stick lumber. So typically residential, 5-6 stories, they were built with concrete, steel, and now people, they find it's a good solution. It costs less, and it's now part of the 2021 code. And the battle on the code, for the people in the US probably know that better than most of us in Canada. But there is a national code, but then every state has to adopt the code. So they don't all accept the national code. Some of them, I mean, are 2, 3, 4 cycles back on the code changes. So the battle is not won, it's not accepted. But now we need, through the 4 components of what the SLB is funding, to go convince every state to adopt the new code. And of course, the steel guys and the concrete guys are doing the same. So you can imagine that, where after it's the state, it's the city. So the city can go different than the state can go different than the whole US. So it's a never-ending battle if we stop talking about wood, and if we don't push, well, I mean, other components are going to come back and try to regain their market share. It's no different than Ford, Chrysler, and Toyota fighting for market share, really. I mean, we all have products that can build homes, and we all want them to use our products. The difference being, we're a bunch of small producers, and we have kind of a coalition to try to promote together in a more organized way. Okay, this one here, 5- and 6-story, non-residential. Those have the highest potential for new wood consumption. And I'll show you a graph. Remember that the new building code allows you to up to 18 stories. It'd be very sexy to have a bunch of 18-story wood building. But the truth is, the potential of growth for that, for wood, is very limited. It's limited for many reasons. First of all, to build that we'll need a lot of training, and people will need how to do it, and there's not that many anyways. So the focus of the SLB is going to be up to 6, 7 stories, because that's where most of the volume is. So, contrary to the presentation before, red is good. So this is basically by state where the potentials are. And you can see that on the West Coast, they really embraced wood, and they have more and more projects. So there is a lot of traction, and it's now starting in the East. 7 to 12 stories. Of course, those can be exposed partially, but not fully. So some of the components, structural components, needs to be protected, so you won't see them. That's a high potential, especially for residential, thinking about, smaller units, condo units with a different look inside. So this is, if you go to Montreal, or if some of you are staying in the new hotels here in Montreal, we have that, but with concrete. So we need to have some of those, but with wood exposed versus concrete. Okay, this one is University of Northern British Columbia. That's in Prince George, and that's a university building. This was also built with mass timber, which typically before it would have been built with concrete. This one is a mix of NLT and glulam. There's one that was built in Minneapolis, and there's two other projects in play, one in Chicago and one in Atlanta, Georgia. So some companies, architect designs, once they've built one, they want to build more. And what we were told by people that are building non-residential building is typically they can get more money on their lease than a traditional building. So, and that's really like the business risk that some of those investors are taking is, if I do something different, my revenues will be different as well. And proof is going to be in the pudding, so once we'll have a couple thousand projects like that, if really people get more revenue, they'll be willing to pay more, or they'll be pushing on wood even more. And again, red is good, 7 to 12 stories, less potential. It's really in a very early stage. It's just got approved in the new building code, but there is some traction. So here, very interesting is how many square feet can you build depending on the size of the building. So it tells you above 12 stories, it's not worth your 35 cents, 1,000 board feet. It's focusing on less than 8 stories is going to be a lot of volume, and it's going to be sufficient volume to make a difference. So if we take 25% of the non-residential 1 to 4 stories, 67% of the 5 and 6, and so on, the potential for wood is an additional 8.5 billion board feet, and that's an annual volume. And this is not homes or buildings that are not being built. Those are buildings that they're happening, they're just not using wood. So I go back to the objective, it's to use more wood, grow the pie. There was lots, again, of friction when the agreement was signed in 2006, is, Canada left $1 billion on the table. Why would we pay 35 cents to grow wood when, already left $1 billion on the table? I mean, we can argue and fight about that as much as we want, but at the end of the day, if we grow the pie, everybody will benefit. If we don't grow the pie, somebody else will grow their own, and our pie is going to get smaller. I mean, you're damn if you do, you're damn if you don't. If you don't do anything, your pie is going to shrink, so you might as well do something to try to expand yours. Mass timber, so cross-laminated timber, nail-laminated timber, heavy timber, posts and beams. Those more and more get traction. There's 157 projects in 2018. There's 230 more, I believe, in the drawing mode. So this is not a big market yet. The bigger the circle, the bigger the traction. And those projects, as you saw in the pictures, and for the ones that have seen some of the Olympics buildings in Vancouver, it's a snowball effect. Those are nice. They do cost more, but they're different. And if you do that as a non-residential and you have some lease revenues, it's probably going to bring you back more money as well. So competitors, I mean, these are actual real advertising that were paid by our competitors. So, 1,300 trees to be precise to build a mass timber structure. As we don't cut trees, we harvest trees. I guess I don't have to convince this crowd. We harvest trees, we replant trees, they're going to come back, and it's just it's a change. It's just not pretty. I mean, this is not a pretty picture, but and remember, now you're on the internet. I mean, people see that. Oh my God, it's bad, and then they share with 1,000 people on Facebook. I mean, so a picture can lie, and then if you don't respond, this picture is going to stay there. For the people in Quebec, think about the Desjardins video. I mean, this negative publicity is easy, but something needs to be done so that at least people that have interest in knowing the truth can find out what the truth is. The other one, well, if a building burns and there's stuff in the house, of course, this is not going to be pretty. But, you know, for a young family with 2 young children that see that, I mean, they can be scared. They can be scared. I mean, there's no, if you look at the U.S., part of the new building code, I think the people that have the most influence are probably the firefighters. I mean, they ask for their opinion all the time because those are the first responders, and they have to go in a house. And this is all the whole thing about these 5 stories, 6 stories, is how long is it going to last because the floor is going to collapse and stuff like that. So, I mean, wood is more predictable. I mean, if it's covered with sheetrock, it's going to last longer. So it's a whole debate about how to build and so on. And I think that if we continue to find solution about how to build better with wood, I mean, we can compete with steel and concrete anytime. So if the last couple 100 years were steel and concrete, maybe the next 100 years could be wood. This is a statement from an architect from Europe. I think Europe started way before us and starting to build with wood. There's lots of wood construction with CLT and glulam in Italy. But now that we have traction, what was important about doing a program in the United States is, you know, we have nice projects in Canada. I mentioned Vancouver. There's some with some producers in Quebec as well. But the truth is the U.S. is 10 times bigger than Canada. So if we have good solutions here, you do want to replicate them south of the border because the market's much bigger and the distances are not far. That's it.